I had always believed that the Adidas Adizero Boston lineup represents the kind of beginner runner targeted shoe. But after doing some digging and trying to learn about its origin story, I don't quite believe that's the complete case, at least not from today. This is why the Adidas Adizero Boston exists. The Boston series was first introduced right around 2008 when Adidas was truly looking for something that provided responsiveness, performance, as well as durability. It's not rocket science, but the name was actually inspired by the Boston Marathon. And so this really prompted Adidas to try to look for something that competed in the mid to long distance, closer to the marathon running, and able to withstand the terrain and the requirements of something like a Boston Marathon. Now, Adidas already had a presence in terms of running shoes at the time. So the Boston wasn't really their first venture into marathon running. They had shoes like the Supernova as well as the Adistar. But really, these shoes weren't being targeted and marketed at the marathon running. And so the Boston lineup was truly their first exploration into trying to build a marathon ready shoe. Around the same time, Nike had, for example, the Nike Air Pegasus as well as the Zoom series, which is still to this day quite a popular option among the running community. The Boston was aimed to provide lightweight design, really streamlined performance, but also ensure that it provides stability and comfort. Now, did this mean that the Boston lineup was the most expensive option that runners could go for? Well, not really. So at the time, Adidas had the Adistar as well as the Supernova in their lineup. These were quite premium shoes, retailing for around $120 at the time, quite expensive. But when you really look at what premium meant at the time, premium meant comfort, durability, as well as stability, not really a significant focus on performance. However, as the evolution of time went on from the first introduction of the Boston lineup, Adidas then started to develop two clear categories. One was premium and more stability focused, and the second category was more performance oriented. And this is where the Adizero Boston started to shine, and later products would unfollow from the Adizero branding. So, fast forward to 2016, and we saw the introduction of Boost, which was Adidas's shoe technology that allowed it to provide runners with a ride that was quite supportive, very bouncy, and quite responsive, and not on the stiff side and also not on the heavy side. Remembering that the earlier versions of your Adistar as well as your Supernova shoes were on the heavy side and some weighing right around 300 to 400 grams. So premium was now starting to be attached to performance instead of how long will this shoe last me. And the evolution of this brought us some really great inventions. But before we got to the light strike inventions, we had the long winter, because from 2016 right around to 2022, Adidas really had no response to the market and had no meaningful additions in terms of the shoe technology. Then came Light Strike Pro in 2020. This was an exclusive for the Adios Pro lineup. However, 2 years later, it trickled down to the Boston 12. So here with me, I have the lime colorway. Now, of course, Adidas have introduced various other colorways since this was first released. But really, this was a response in terms of providing something that was really going to signal that they were back in the market segment for marathon running, because it was the introduction of three key features on the shoe: Light Strike 2.0, Light Strike Pro, as well as energy rods. Now, stay with me here. So Light Strike Pro is the shoe foam technology that you find towards the heel of the shoe. Light Strike 2.0, it's a foam technology that you find in the more forefoot sections of the running shoe, really giving you that end-to-end support in terms of absorbing that impact on the road, as well as ensuring that you have relatively good energy returns. Now, energy rods Adidas says these are glass-infused fiber rods, so mimicking carbon fiber plates, but there's about 5 of these in the Boston 12, which mimic the shape of your metatarsals on your foot. So this should enhance the stability of the shoe and ensure that you don't really have that wobbly feeling as you're hitting the road and lifting off. Now, what's my take on the Boston 12? If we go back to the original promise of the Boston 12 to deliver performance, stability, and durability, really 2 out of those 3 aspects are ticked for me in this iteration of the Boston. In terms of performance, this shoe is really responsive and you really do feel that snappiness as well as lift off because of the light strike foam as well as the stability aspects as a result of the energy rods. So really when you're running on different kinds of terrain, whether it's road running, when it's dry or when it's wet, you can really expect that continental rubber underneath to provide you with good traction and support you running. And even when you're running on the dirt roads, I would anticipate a similar level of grip just because of how good it really is. In terms of fit, now, this is where I really experienced some bit of challenges because I went true to size. However, the shoe is definitely more on the wider side, and I have quite a more narrow foot. And so there's quite ample space, around the parts of my foot that really doesn't give me that lock in and tie in. Of course, now this is more subjective to my own personal preference, but I really preferred the shoe lock in technology that was introduced in the Pro models. Now, in terms of durability, this is where I still have some bit of questions because previous iterations of the shoe were rated to go quite long, over 1,000 kilometers to really still have that decent level of support in the shoe. However, that's quite significantly cut in the latest iteration, rated for around 400 to 500 miles. It might be, slightly less depending on the kind of running you do, as well as the terrain you're running on. And just looking at the overall design of the shoe, when you consider the upper, you can definitely still see that it's more of a mesh design. And so that might be prone to more wear and tear when you compare it to various other materials that were introduced in the Boston lineup. And so this is partly where you can see the deviation from Adidas to really go away from that aspect of durability and a shoe that lasts to more performance, but in a more budget-friendly price category. So that brings me to this point. With this new information that I've gathered, is this still the beginner runner friendly shoe and really the shoe that I'd recommend for anyone who is new to running? Well, broadly speaking, absolutely. It's the kind of shoe that you really start to learn what your preferences are, but then also you get to experience some of the benefits that come from the more expensive and pro shoes. So aspects such as the energy rods as well as the foam will really give you that decent support. And because it's not really leaning more on the carbon plates, it means that these shoes are quite forgiving at the slower paces. And really, you can grow into these shoes as you go from being beginner to more intermediate in your running. And now, while there is the Boston 13s that were recently introduced, you can definitely get these at a much more reasonable price. And currently on the Adidas website, you can get them for as low as 50% off, around $80. And so they really represent great value when you consider something that you really want to start with and try to grow your running journey. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the deep dive into the Boston 12, and I also reviewed the Adios Pro 4. So if you're interested in that, be sure to check that video out. But otherwise, like, subscribe, and as I like to say, keep running.